demonstrations. And a lot of the South African composers that are now emerging from South Africa and they're writing music, they have inspired their works from the history of South Africa. And I think it is also the time to give South Africa a voice on the international stage.
There'll be poetry dedicated to the young people killed in the uprisings, a performance of freedom songs by pianist Ndlovu Makatini, and music inspired by the book Nelson Mandela's Favourite African Folk Tales, produced by Shirley Thompson.
It's a chance for people to come together, to remember history, but to also celebrate the music, the culture, the traditions that come from South Africa.
But the central piece of the programme will be performed by bassist Leon Bosch. He was arrested as a teenager by South African police for organising protests around the time of the uprising, and he later fled to England as a refugee. He'll be performing Red Ink by Cape Town composer Shane Woodbourne.
This piece describes the uprising, the pain, the suffering, the anger. And Shane's piece contains so many references to things which resonate deeply with me. For example, he quotes from the South African national anthem in the music, and in the final movement of this concerto, it is there in the most painful way possible. It is the
to central London's High Cross at the Bank.
It's very, very I may be needing technical services. Is this sorted out now? Okay, thank you. Good evening to this very important event of memorialization of the 50 years of the Soweto Uprisings. We've got very, very important guests with us. But before we get to that, I'm going to call our Dean to come and do the welcoming. Up to you, Dean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ochela. Kumnandi balapha. It's nice to be here. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this public lecture that will reflect on the 50th anniversary of the Soweto student uprisings, by Professor Sifiso Ndlovu, who was just 14 years old in 1976 at Pefeni Junior Secondary School in Soweto. That is to say that in our midst is a shaper of history, a student of history, and a towering historian whose work is an inspiration to many of us. For years before meeting him in person, I taught Professor Ndlovu's book, The Soweto Uprisings, Counter Memories of June 1976, a book that allows us to appreciate the structural challenges that led to the uprisings, the shift from school protests happening in boarding schools to schools in the township, and a book that importantly surfaces the intergenerational role of Black elders as teachers, members of school boards, and journalists, among others. Ndlovu challenges the view that the youth of 1976 were not inspired or supported by elders who objected to the imposition of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction. In the book, Lives of Courage, Women for a New South Africa by Diana Russell, there is a passage that I have read many times of the interview that Russell did with Winnie Madikizela Mandela about the events of Wednesday, 16 June 1976. Madikizela Mandela says, and I quote, "I don't think I will ever erase the memory of those days from my subconscious mind. It was the most painful thing to witness the killing of our children, the flow of blood, the anger of the people against the government, and the force that was used by the government on defenseless and unarmed children. I was present when it started. The children were congregated at school just 2 blocks away from here. I saw it all. There wasn't a single policeman in sight at the time, but they were called to the scene. When they fired live ammunition on the school children, when Hector Peterson, a 12-year-old child, was ripped to pieces, his bowels dangling in the air, with his sister, Antoinette Sitole, screaming and trying to gather the remains of her brother's body, not a single child had picked up even a piece of soil to fling at the police. The police shot indiscriminately, killing well over 1,000 children," end quote. This evening, Professor Ndlovu takes us to the aftermath of the uprisings and shows us how the murder of school children marked a turning point in the fight against apartheid and the building of a global solidarity against apartheid as a crime against humanity. It is fitting that we start in Soweto to reflect on the power and imagination of young people whose futures were made structurally disposable. In this current context, where civil servants are assassinated in their driveways and traffic stops from Babita, Diokoran to Mpo, Mafole by a collusion of syndicates inside and outside of the state, it is the future that is sold for the price of a fleet of luxury cars, watches, mansions, handbags, champagne bottles, and private jets. On the 17th and 18th of August, Ambassador Sikose MG, who Professor Ndlovu will speak about today, together with Gracia Machel and Samora Machel Jr., will be in Makanda to participate in a symposium reflecting on Samora Machel, liberation movements, and the unfinished business and the unfinished decolonial project. That symposium will mark the 40th anniversary of the death of Samora Machel, the liberation fighter of Southern Africa and Mozambique's first president. Phumla Dineo Gola reminds us that a year like this one which allows various formative historical moments to rub against each other and cycle each other and overlap, shows that our history could not be a timeline and that continuities shifted and returned to us with new implications. On the 27th and 28th of August, Professor Gola, together with other feminist scholars and activists, will be in Makanda to reflect with us about the 70th anniversary of the 9 August 1956 Women's March, the 20th anniversary of the silent protest against rape culture at Rhodes University, and the 10th anniversary of RU reference list. From the Women's March to the Soweto Uprisings, the anniversary of Michelle's death, to the silent protest and RU reference list. In these gatherings, we are asking the question, how do struggles across generations show both continuities and ruptures in the pursuit of freedom, dignity, and safety? I would like to thank the Humanities Faculty for collaborating with History, Political and International Studies, and the Division for Equity and Institutional Culture to bring us together to reflect on the actions, the visions and dreams of young people like Professor Ndlovu, who embarked on a world-making project that changed the world. I would like to thank Professor Ndlovu for providing an example for me and my generation of what it looks like to engage in scholarship with rigor, commitment, and generosity. We are lucky that Professor Ndlovu is the chairperson of the Ministerial Task Team on the teaching of history in basic education. We have an assurance that generations of young people will know that African life is not defined by the battles and the attempts to conquer of the past 400 years, but rather that Africans lived and have shaped the world around them for thousands of years. So welcome to you all, and thank you.
Thank you, Dean Professor Magada, for that very alluring opening remark and the welcome. My task is simple, is just for the benefit of the audience to read the profiles of the key speakers today, starting, of course, with the eminent Professor Sifiso Ndlovu. And then the discussants as well. So I'm going to start with Professor Ndlovu. Professor Sifiso Ndlovu works at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs, University of South Africa, as a research director. He is also the editor of the South African Democracy Education Trust multi-volume series, On the Road to Democracy in South Africa. He is a graduate in history from the University of Natal and the University of the Witwatersrand. He is an author and the editor of books on the Soweto Uprisings. These include the Soweto Uprisings, Counter Memories of June 16, that was printed by Raven Press as early as 1998, which was also mentioned by the Dean. Soweto 76 Reflections on the Liberation Struggle commemorate the 30th anniversary of June 16, 1976, co-edited with Ali Hlongwane and Mutobi Mutlowadze, which was printed by the Mutlowadze Arts Heritage Trust in 2006. And The Road to Democracy in South Africa, Volume 7, Soweto Uprisings, New Perspectives, Commemorations, and Memorializations, edited by Professor Sifiso Ndlovu for the South African Democracy Education Trust. And this is printed in 2017 by UNISA Press. Prof. Ndlovu is the chairperson of the ministerial task team for the Department of Basic Education, tasked with reviewing the South African school history curriculum and advising on making history a compulsory subject, the point that the Dean alluded to. So that's, in a nutshell, the profile of our keynote speaker. I'm going to move on and introduce the other speakers so that I don't have to do that when the discussion is on. The respondents, starting with the one nearer to me, is Dr. Nolwandle Lembete. Is a philosophy lecturer in the Alan Gray Center for Leadership Ethics here at Rhodes University. She obtained her doctorate in philosophy from the University of Witwatersrand with the support of the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences. Her research interests include African philosophy, social epistemology, and the philosophy of research. Dr. Lembete is actively engaged in the international academic community and is a fellow of the Center for Advanced Studies in Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Hildesheim, Germany. Her work explores questions of knowledge production, epistemic justice, and African philosophical thought with a particular interest in how social and institutional structures shape practice of knowing and inquiry. Thank you. And then our last respondent is Ms. Alake Kondilati, who you can see is a young and aspiring historian, was born and raised in Gonge, formerly known as King Williamstown. As an only child in her family, she holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and Sociology here at Rhodes University and is currently enrolled for her second degree, a Bachelor of Arts Honors in History. Her honors thesis is based on an erotic capital, often referred to as a pretty privilege, and the women of South Africa in the 20th century. Her work offers a different perspective on the lives of these women by analyzing how, despite the inequalities they faced, they found innovative ways to utilize their erotic wealth to their advantage and navigated systems of injustices. Here are the three speakers. So the order today will be, we're going to call Professor Sifiso Ndlovu first to do the lecture, and then the respondents then will be in discussion. Thank you.
She's here. Okay. Thank you. I just hope I'm audible. I know in terms of intonation, my voice is more or less on the quieter side of things. I think I took after my mom. Yeah. Because she was quiet and very kind. And I'd like to welcome Ubaba Ezra Tisani. When they spoke about the Department of Basic Education, I thought about, was it a JUTA grade 8 or 7 textbooks we wrote years ago, going back to those times. And Dr. Tisani, who is also part of my project team in the Road to Democracy in South Africa, when we wrote volume 9 on the power and authority of African women in pre-colonial times. For me, I know we have about 10 volumes of that series and about 18 or 19 books. But volume 9 is one of my favorite volumes. I do have other favorites, but that one, including her work, and I hope we'll still continue with that project, because in terms of the historiography of South Africa, that's quite an important project that we ever did. And I'm so blessed to be here. I just want to thank the university community for inviting me, because in my life I never thought I would be at this point. Growing up in Soweto during apartheid times, born in Soweto, and I just had a shock in my life when my kids, a boy and a girl, turned 14. For the first time in my life, I understood what it is to be a 14-year-old. Because what I went through as a 14-year-old, that was quite abnormal. That was quite abnormal. And what I did afterward was so crazy. I never went back to school controlled by South African government. I never went back to school in terms of Bantu education. June 1976, that was my last time in the classroom. And as a 14-year-old, I think for me to take such a decision was together with my compatriots. I mean, you do understand that, you know, if we are young kids, you go to attend school, the government should be happy. Unless, of course, it thought that some of us will say we are not going to go to school because education is the opium of the nation. No, we didn't think that. We wanted to go to school, but we were chased away. We didn't. And when the Department of Bantu Education changed to the Department of Education and Training, I was no longer there. What we did as a group of youngsters then, I think it was also crazy. We were lucky to find out that in town in Johannesburg, there was a correspondent college called Tarrant Correspondent College, which was controlled by SACED. Some of you know what SACED is, who controlled SACED. We went there, we registered there. Luckily, we had parents who were understanding in a sense. Some of my cousins and everybody else were taken to boarding schools in rural areas. I never thought about that as a solution. I stuck around home until I discovered this. But we were doing the British system, the British O-levels system. But the problem that I had then, I think I was a nerd in the sense that we belonged to the special classes at school. The ones who, if you remember then the education system, I passed my standard 6 with a first class pass. And you remember then when you get those high marks, you are called to the assembly, you stand at the assembly. The school has to be told that this one has passed with distinction. So when you go to secondary school, they choose you, they say, this one is intelligent, so he's going to do science. It belongs. What he's going to do is from 1A, from 2A, from 3A is. So we ended up doing that. And the class had people who were brainy in that sense. All of us had got top marks. We were doing sciences. So meritocracy was the order of the day. So 1975, we're doing Form 1. I'm not sure it's grade 8 or grade 1. Then we're using English as a medium of instructions. And remember then, even vernacular and Abantu education was the order of the day. So studying mathematics, we called it izibalo, health sciences as a mpilo, geography, as emvelo, and all that. So that was fine. We accepted that. But come junior secondary school, we are using English. We still fight amongst ourselves for better marks. We are doing well. We do know. We are such young upstarts that whoever is doing from 1B, from 1C, from 1D, from 1E, from 1F, doesn't have it intellectually. We look down upon them. But come 1976, we switch to Afrikaans. When we switched to Afrikaans, we couldn't believe the first marks we got for our test. Suddenly, in your life, you can get 10 out of 50, 4 out of 50. First time ever in your life. First time ever in your life, you're getting 5 of 50. Because we used to compete amongst ourselves, and I think the best students were female students. We always knew number 1, number 2, number 3 were female students in the class. But they were getting 6 out of 50. Yeah. For the first time, life is great. They are no longer pitying. They are no longer pitying us. But it's not a joke in a sense that that's my book, The Soweto Uprisings. So, Counter Memories. I tell that story in that book. But I'm not going to repeat everything in the book. I'm not going to do anything about the book. I'm just introducing myself. The best way to read the book, it's the archives itself. The archive itself, because I'm a historian. Just to make it a point that you don't understand what others used to say are saying about the uprisings, that they are spontaneous. They were never spontaneous. If you read the book, the best way to go about it, read the newspaper article, the World newspaper. It's a black newspaper. White journalists were not allowed to enter the townships. All the journalists are black. So the dates start from February, March, April, May, then June. So it means as from early as February, the uprisings had begun. So read those newspapers. Read how the parents were up in arms against school board. Because we were telling them at home that we are getting 3 out of 20 or whatever. So they were up in arms. So in a nutshell, there was no ANC in the class. There was no black consciousness. There was no PAC. It was just us getting 5 out of 50. And we decided then. That is why I'm thinking at 14, I'm thinking enough is enough. What did we do? We said to our teachers, thank you very much. We are sorry. We knew you went to the College of Education, you went to university, whether at Fort Hare or Zululand or at Teflop, or you went to the colleges of education, enrolled for a teacher's diploma. You were all taught in English for you to qualify to be teachers here. But it's not nice to us. We can tell you are struggling. You can't teach in Afrikaans. We feel the pain as our teachers. Can you help us? Please don't come back to the classroom. Go and sit at the staff office. We can't bear the pain because you are our parents. Lucky enough, the apartheid regime was so crazy. The school, a single school, has two medium of instruction, one Afrikaans, one English. The senior students from 3 are taught in English. Therefore, our teacher, we said to them, you can go and teach those ones. For us, don't come to class. We're going to teach ourselves in English. And we did that. I don't even know whether in terms of a pedagogy we got it right, but we said the teachers shouldn't come to class. And the next thing we did, we took the textbooks, the Afrikaans textbooks. We buried our principal under the books at his office, that we don't need these books. And by April, I think April or May 17th, March, April, May, we were not attending school, but we'll leave home, we'll go to school, we'll be within the schoolyard around 3 or 4 when we have to go home, we'll go home. We never made it a point that we'll loiter around the street, but we kept on talking about our plight as 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15 years old, and 16 years old. And we said officially on May 17, we went on strike. That was the last time we were in the classroom. So that is why I'm saying that was also my last time to be in the classroom. I went to Tarrant Correspondence College, studied maths, physics, and biology. Went to Swaziland to continue my studies, doing my A-levels at St. Mark's High School in Babane, Swaziland. Others went overseas to continue with their studies, to do A-levels. And after Swaziland, I went to the University of Natal, Pietermaritzburg. And I think now I have a sense of what we were doing as 14 years old. But I envy my children. They had a normal life as 14 years old, unlike myself. But at Maritzburg, it was a situation like the university had to have 25% of black students. In South Africa, 75% was white students. So in lecture rooms, if you see the number of our white compatriots here, we found ourselves in that situation. The rest was white students. The number of our white compatriots was sometimes the number of students in a given lecture, in certain lectures. And we probably sat in a corner, maybe the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows will be us. The rest, it's white students. So when I'm watching all of you here, I'm so happy. For the first time in my life, what we did in 1976, this is the practical explanation of it. Makes sense that we have a black majority in a lecture room. In my university life, I've never seen this. I have never seen this. I'm not used to this. We're such a minority that it's only now that, okay, the best thing you've done is 14 years old. It's this. And it means the country will have these intellectuals out of this group. And you are blessed in the sense that you are lucky. The future is yours. With us, as I say, I will never, ever do whatever we did then again. And I wouldn't like You see 14 years old doing that because of their government. The government should take care of 14 years old. Make it a point that life is normal, just like this. So for the first time, I'm making sense that, the future for me is promising. It's great. So that's all. That's what the Prof is about. So you have so much responsibility in your hands that what I'm going to do, my first presentation is, what did we do? Because we were talking about memories. I'm not talking about the book. Can you go to the Hector Peterson slide? Yeah. Slide. What did we do? The slide on Hector Peterson, not this one. This one, yeah. No, this one. Yeah, no. Why is can you switch off this PowerPoint and go to the Hector Peterson one? What we did as a group again, we decided to make it a point that today it's all about memory. And what did we do to preserve that memory? That makes it a point that we honor the youth. You can't, where's the memory stick? Can you go here? It is here, but it's not showing there. It's showing here. So what we decided to do, yes, please, and on the screen, was to make it a point that the memory is preserved. So I was part of this project. We decided to preserve the memory in terms of the building of the, can you come back, please? Can you go to the first one, please? The first slide. Can you show me the slides? Yeah, one by one. This is the first one. Well, if I want to go to the next one, do I press? Okay, go back. Okay. So what we decided to do was to make it a fact that we build the Hector Peterson Memorial Museum in Soweto. And this Memorial Museum, some of you probably know about it, you have been there. It's one of the few memorial museums in the world that is dedicated to people like you, the youth, and what they've done in terms of attaining freedom in their lifetime. And also, we're quite aware that there are contestations about the museum itself, which we will discuss. The fact that it was named after Hector Peterson, not after Tsietsi Mashinini, whom everyone knows that says that he was the leader of the Soweto Uprisings, not even after Hastings Ndlovu, actually, who was the very first student to be shot and killed by the police. It was not Hector Peterson. But for all those who were criticizing us, we said to them, it's not a numbers game. It's not number one or number two. It's not about Tsietsi was a senior high school student who was using English as a medium of instruction. Yes, he was the leader of the Soweto Student Representative Council. But we are going to use Hector because he was the symbol because of the newspaper article. So we are going to stick to him. And also, this memorial belongs to the youth of the world because we feel that post-1994, what we believe is that South African youth, whether at university, at school, should become the citizens of the world. It's unlike us when we were forced that we are not going to be educated, we are not going to use education to become a citizen of the world. So the youth is part of the group that owns this museum. So I was therefore appointed as the principal researcher for the museum. So, as I said, there are contestations. The narrative itself, the exhibit itself, has to do with the fact that there are no liberation movements there. They didn't lead a struggle that was led by the kids there. There's no Black consciousness movement. Yes, it was above the ground, operated around the 1960s. Yes, Steve Biko was there. There's no PAC, it's just student. So the narrative itself is contentious in that sense. But we carried on, we did it. So the museum was opened on 16 June 2002, and in terms of the audience, it has attracted a diverse audience. We can say local and international tourists. It includes Bill Clinton and other international, politicians from all over the world. The visitors book says that. And also, what did we do also? We did all that to integrate the Memorial Museum and the Uncle Tom Community Center. What did we do? The museum itself, it's built in a red brick. The red brick, it looks like the houses in Orlando West. If you are from Orlando West, if you know Orlando West in Soweto, it had to look like the houses around them. And then we had memorial and water features, etc., because it began as a museum where we only had containers. It was only containers before 2010. No, before 2002, with photographs. So when we went on the spilling spree with funding from everybody else, we made it a point that we had no containers. So what I can say for now, that's it for this presentation from this slide. If you're around Soweto, you can go around there because the precinct is rich. It includes Hector Peterson Memorial Museum, Zef Motopeng's house, Water and Albertina Sisulu House, the Mandela Museum, the Open Air Town, the June Amundi Church, the Walter Sisulu Memorial Square. So if you are in Soweto, you can visit all these sites to make it a point that you understand that we were part of those projects. So I'm going to leave things as this. It is parochial history. We're looking at South Africa, but the problem is we are part of the world. The issue is what can we do now to make it a point that the museum doesn't belong to South Africans, but we are part of the world. And as I said, you are part of the citizens of the world. And then I will show you what I mean about that. That Soweto is everywhere. It's not confined in Soweto. And in terms of my book, that is why I use the fact that it is the Soweto Uprisings. They were not confined in Soweto. They were in all other provinces. They were here in the Eastern Cape because the youth in the Eastern Cape, sort of in terms of solidarity, they were part of us. They played their role. But what I don't find acceptable, we don't have publications about the youth in the Eastern Cape in terms of making it a point that they sympathize with the youth of Soweto. In the Western Cape, that was the case, including the University of Western Cape. It played a role. Students there made it a point that they went out and supported Wits University. In the old Transvaal, in Northern Transvaal, that is the case. In rural areas, in the Free State, that is the case. So the uprisings spread throughout the country. So that is why, therefore, I refer to the Soweto Uprisings rather than the Soweto Uprising. Because if I do that, if I don't use the plural, it means it's just a parochial Soweto issue. But it doesn't end there. It becomes part of the international world. So I'm going to show you my second PowerPoint in terms of expressing that point, that as South Africans, you don't have to think about yourself as the only people in the world who can do things, and you start saying, Abahambi. You are part of the international world. You have to accept that fact. And what I'm going to do, can I have the first slide? The first slide. The first slide. This one. No, yeah. So, you are part of the world. This is in London. This is in London, the anti-apartheid movement, commemorating the Soweto Uprising on June 16. And the symbolism here, you can tell that, yes, it's a proper coffin. And surely there's no body, physical body inside the coffin, but marching through the streets of London, for me, it simply means that the anti-apartheid movement had vested interests in terms of what we did as a youth. And it means that whatever you do as a youth, don't be parochial. You are part of the international world. Make it a point that you form networks with the other youth throughout the international world. I will tell you in historical terms that, for example, when the Americans were fighting their war of independence during the 1700s, they knew that without a world superpower, they wouldn't survive. And therefore, they decided to make it a point that they will choose the French as the allies who are going to support them in their battle with the English for their independence. Again, in our struggle for national liberation in the 1960s, when the ANC was exiled, it decided that because the apartheid government was supported by the Western superpowers, the US, Britain, West Germany, Italy, France, therefore it had to have a superpower supporting it. And in terms of the Cold War, they chose who? They chose the Soviet Union. It was not an incident that they had to make that decision. So, in terms of the struggles that you engage in as the youth, you make it a point that you reach those decisions. That's why, therefore, in terms of fees must fall, you had to link with the British students in terms of Oxford, and make it a point that you are collaborating with them in terms of roads. So this is the case. You can tell that the other fellows here are South Africans in exile, but the majority of the people here are members of the anti-apartheid movement. And also, to prove that point, this sculpture, it's in Brixton, in London also. It is there, it is permanent. Why will people in Brixton say that in a park we want to build a sculpture dedicated to the youth of Soweto? It's permanent. If you go to London, you'll find it there. And as you can tell, it is Mxolisi and Hector, and on the right, it's Hector's sister. It is there. It is permanent. And the British people took the uprising so seriously that they had to do this. So that is why I'm saying in your outlook, make it a point that you connect yourself with the youth of the world in your struggles, even if it's a struggle against our government, that we made it a point that is in power. So the other video I want to play, I'm not sure where, can you play that? That in London, during the 50th anniversary, on the June of 16 this year, they also went all out and made it a point that they celebrate the 50th anniversary of their uprisings themselves. They never said they are not South Africans, but they were saying that we make it a point that we don't forget, we remember what happened 50 years ago. Can you play? We'll play about 2 minutes or whatever of this.
Soweto, and to protest Britain's own role in facilitating its execution. "50 years later, musicians in Britain with links to South Africa and the wider continent are marking this key moment in the anti-apartheid struggle with music.
The African Concert Series is documenting not only the music, but also the culture and the history of Africa. And I thought it was fitting and it was timely to feature and to focus on South Africa as a region, and not only musically, but also historically. Music has also played a very important role in South Africa's history. Music that was performed in the fight against apartheid, music that was performed in riots, in demonstrations, and a lot of the South African composers that are now emerging from South Africa and they're writing music, they have inspired their works from the history of South Africa. And I think it is also the time to give South Africa a voice on the international stage.
There'll be poetry dedicated to the young people killed in the uprisings, a performance of freedom songs by pianist Ndlovu and music inspired by the book Nelson Mandela's Favorite African Folk Tales, produced by Shirley Thompson.
It's a chance for people to come together, to remember history, but to also
national world. And it's what? Okay. And probably you can tell, therefore, internationalists in London made it a point that they make a special tribute to you in South Africa. What also happened immediately after the uprisings, the United Nations got involved. So in whatever you do, don't even forget that multilateral organizations are quite crucial in terms of spreading your message. The United Nations got involved in the sense that, yes, the South African apartheid government was recognized as a sovereign state, so the liberation movement didn't have any representations at the United Nations. So what happened was that all the African countries themselves made it a point who were at the United Nations that they are going to form a group. They called it an Africa group. So what the Africa group did at the United Nations was that any other program that had to do with the liberation struggle in South Africa, they were going to make it a point that it is part of the agenda of the Security Council and other bodies. So what they did was they consulted with the liberation movement. In their consultations with the liberation movement, the representatives like Johnny McCartin and them will make it a point that they told them these are the issues at play, and they will go to the United Nations Assembly and present the actual challenges to them. So the same thing happened when the uprising took place. The person who was spearheading that group was Salim Ahmed Salim, who represented Tanzania. But together with his colleagues, they made it a point that the United Nations invited Oliver Tambo to address it on the 26th of October, 1976. Can you come, please? On the 26th of October, 1976, he made an appearance and he presented his case. I just want to see the PowerPoint. I wanted to go to the next point. So when he was there, let's go, yes. So this is what I've just said to you. Then I'm going down now, yeah. Okay. Then Salim Ahmed Salim, the Tanzanian ambassador to the UN from 1970 to 1980, and also a Security Council member. He also presided over the Special Committee on Decolonization. So he made it a point that your voices are heard at the United Nations. And through Johnny McCartin, whom they worked with, he was the ANC representative in the US. He coordinated diplomatic lobby efforts and organizing student exile awareness tours, and also Tambo. But what was surprising was that a student who experienced the uprisings in Soweto ended up addressing the United Nations General Assembly on 4 November 1976. That was unbelievable for me. That was really unbelievable because in terms of the historiography of the uprisings, most of the books were written by white scholars and authors. And when I was at university, I avoided those books. I never used them, never touched them. And I think even when I was doing my PhD thesis on King Tengane using oral traditions, my supervisor, Philip Bonner, said, unlike King Shaka, King Tengane is difficult. So what if we fail in terms of getting the archives and oral traditions? I said, I'll do Soweto Uprisings. They are easy. So, but I never did that. But I wrote my first book on the uprisings because of the fact that I used to run away from my lecture rooms I wanted to address that point. That is why I ended up with a book on counter memories, because it's my story. If theatre machining is not there, it is not theatre machining's story. If the ANC is not there, it is not the ANC story, it's my story. That's why it's counter memories. I wrote it in 1996. The other insider who wrote the book was Sibongile Mkabela, her book, which was published in the year 2001. That is, it took us so many years after most of the books that you have read, I think, that you have read when you were a student, that you still read, were written by what? By who? By white authors. But our books are the first one. But I'm not telling the truth. It's not. Until I got hold of Sichaba, the ANC magazine, published in 1977, I suddenly discovered that Sikosi's Mji interview is published in Sichaba. And who's also published in Sichaba is Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. He, after 76 uprising, he was doing a 5th year in medicine at the University of Natal campus. He decided to leave the university and go to exile. Never completed a medical degree yet. 5 years. The next year, the 6th year, was the final year. He decided to go. So that was for the first time I realized that actually the early narratives that were published about the uprisings are published by Sichaba. But the problem was, if you were found with a copy of Sichaba, you were going to go to jail. So you can't access Sichaba. So we didn't know. I didn't know. But after 1994, I then got copies of Sichaba. That was then. Now I realized that interview, oral history testimony by Sikos MG, it's one of the original because it's fresh. It's fresh in the sense that 1976 November, she's at the United Nations. 1977, she's being interviewed, and I open quote. This is what she says about her experience. I think she also published a book about this, where she has a chapter about this. This is what she said at the UN, that is in November 1976. In addition to O.R. Tambo's speech, they requested that I have a slot as well. So Johnny McCarthy, the ANC representatives in the United, told me to write a speech about the Soweto Uprisings that I'll deliver to the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid. When the day of the speech itself came, I don't remember being nervous. When I was talking in front of the August body, everybody was so attentive. There was so much silence that you could actually hear a pin drop if it had dropped. I was so moved by the honor, the respect, the aura that everybody accorded me that I literally broke down and cried. That respect, that honor just showed me how difficult a road I traveled until then. I didn't stop to pause. Now I was actually doing that thing. How did I leave home? How did I get there? And look at what I'm doing here in New York, so far away from South Africa. So it was just an outpouring of a lot of emotion that had to do with leaving the country illegally, clandestinely, and especially not informing my parents. So the youth then was brave. She left home, just like that. She found herself at the United Nations. I mean, all of you here, can you imagine yourself in those shoes? Suddenly, out of the blue, you are addressing the United Nations. And also, Salim, as I said, representing the Africa group, and was the one who made it a point that a person like Sikose is there. I managed to interview Salim Salim, an elderly statesman, 1976. So this is part of her interviews, and they were published in the book, The Thabo Mbeki I Know. So there were other UN resolutions that were passed, and these are here, they are mentioned here, as a result of the uprisings. And also, I think this is my last point, the World Peace Council also played a role. You may sit down and think about the fact now as we speak, there are so many peace initiatives in the world about Iran, US war, what is happening in Ukraine, and also the wars that we are facing in the African continent, whether in East Africa and all the other areas. You think that these are new initiatives. No, there were bodies like the World Peace Council. They were also interested in making it a point that the United Nations hears a lot about the Soweto Uprising. So their president, Ramesh Chandra, went there and addressed the United Nations. And this is what he says. And also, I'm going to stop here. I don't have time. But at the end of the day, I thought that I will stop by saying that the Soweto Uprisings made it a point that most of the people, activists who were in the Black consciousness movement, went into exile and made it a point that dying organizations like the ANC will get oxygen that they needed. So that's not a joke. This is the speech by Pani Pichane about that, So there were more than 2,000 young students who went into exile also, who made it a point that those who went in 1960s and they were at 60s and 70s, they don't know what they are doing there, are benefiting from the Soweto Uprisings. And that is why Umkhonto Wesizwe ended up having a battalion named after June 16. But that's my last sentence. All I will say is, I just hope some of you who are here will become authors of the new history curriculum after we've submitted the manuscript to Mxolisi. It's not the Department of Education, but it's Mxolisi who are going to be the final arbiters in terms of what will happen. And I hope most of you will take over and play a role, because we need to support the teachers and teacher development and develop materials that are going to be helpful for them. And this is going to be one of the themes. And thank you very much again. And sorry for taking.
Another round of applause for Professor Ndlovu. Thank you. Just running out of time. In fact, I'm going to bring both the discussants and collapse their time. I don't know how much you would have prepared. So in the order of you, Dr. Nolwandle Lembete, and then Alake coming in. And on that very nice note where Prof. Ndlovu ended with the youth bringing or breathing fresh oxygen into the movement. Would love to hear your response. Thank you very much. Yes, or I can give you a mic if you want to sit. Let's see if this is working. Can you make this, and then you can, okay, otherwise you can use this one.
I'll take it off discussion.
I think you're okay.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you. Thank you for this invite. It's such an honor to be here today. Gatsheni, waze wasenza abantu namhlanje siyabonga. Thank you so much for the talk that you've given us today. It was very enlightening. Thank you for reminding us that the Soweto Uprising was never merely a speck in history, but a defining moment that reshaped South Africa's political, moral, and educational landscape. Your lecture reminds us, Your lecture reminds us that its legacy is not confined to the past. It continues to speak to the present through its enduring call for justice, human solidarity, and the recognition of those whose voices have often been marginalized. The class of 1976 held no titles, no PhDs, no degrees. They wielded no fancy academic language. Yet they transformed conversations in universities across South Africa and the world, and in fact, us here today. Their legacy reminds us that one does not need institutional authority to reshape history, and I hope this speaks to all of the students that are here today as well. And as Prof had alluded to, that this legacy is now in your hands, and it's in safe hands, I trust. The class of 1976 fundamentally altered how we understand education by insisting that it be viewed from the perspective of those who experience it most directly, our students. In doing so, they challenged not only the structures of education, but also the very foundations of knowledge itself. They forced us to ask an enduring philosophical question. What counts as knowledge? Who counts as a knower? And whose experiences deserve to shape educational practices? These profound questions emerge not from university lecture halls or centers of political power, but from the streets of the southwestern townships. And, as we Prof had stated, and in and around South Africa and the world. One of the enduring legacies, once again, of the Soweto Uprising is its demonstration of human solidarity and the collective capacity to recognize injustice, to articulate it with moral clarity, and to act decisively against it. The class of 1976 understood that education is never neutral. They recognized that the system imposed upon them did not reflect their lived realities or equip them to confront the material conditions of their lives. Instead, it alienated them from their histories, their communities, and their futures. Nearly 4 decades later, the class of 2015 echoed many of the same concerns. Although they confronted a different political landscape, they too recognized that access to education without meaningful inclusion, relevance, and dignity remains an incomplete form of freedom. Both generations remind us that the struggle for education has always been about more than the classroom or curricula. It's a struggle of whose knowledge matters and who, as a knower, matters. They forged a global language of solidarity that transformed students from the objects of apartheid policy into subjects of international political concern. It was a language that affirmed that young people were not merely recipients of education, but authoritative witnesses to its failures. When Mxolisi, and I'm so happy we went through that quote in depth, when she was in front of the UN, she became overwhelmed while addressing the United Nations. It was not simply that because she had been invited to speak. It was because perhaps for the first time the world was prepared to listen to South Africa through the voice of its own students. And in that moment, the lived experiences of Soweto's youth became a legitimate source of knowledge about injustice, and their testimony transcended Soweto, becoming part of the world's moral and political conscience. I find it deeply disheartening when we had the discussion over the contestations of who would get credit for the uprisings, whether it's the Black consciousness movements, the ANC, etc., because that took away from the people who were literally on the ground and the people who risked their lives and lost their lives in looking up and to sort of refresh my memory on the uprisings, I remember in my history class being taught that 26 people died that day. When I looked it up, they had said the number is not quite known, but it's somewhere around 176 people who lost their lives that day, which made me wonder about the other 150 that were excluded from history, and how, well, I guess we can imagine how the apartheid government got to that number, but it made me wonder how many other people have also been marginalized by the histories of apartheid and the legacies of apartheid. And I like that we also touched on Hector Peterson and the Hector Peterson Museum, because I think that was the first time where, every time when we see the image of Hector Peterson, we're reminded of the brutality of the regime itself, in that it inflicted such harm on such a delicate young person. And I think from that image, the world could see the actual face of apartheid, that the actual face of apartheid was never really behind some legislative doors. It was the lived and perpetual experience of not only Black adult people in South Africa, but also the youth. And I'd like to thank Prof for reminding us of that today, and for reminding us of the persistent legacy of 1976 that has impacted also the legacies of 2015. And I share the sentiment with Prof that when I was also in university, I would have never experienced this demographic as a student. So this demographic is quite heartening to see that this lecture hall is full of the people who we also, in our own ways, whether it's through knowledge creation and production, try to fight for. So thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm going to call it. And I'd like to ask our very nervous speaker to come up.
Hello, everyone. I don't remember ever speaking directly to a mic, but yeah. Okay. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Professor Ndlovu for an amazing lecture, and yeah, I'm totally. Yeah, thank you for joining us, as I was saying. Thank you, Professor Ndlovu, for an amazing lecture, and also thank you to Professor Wachela for introducing me. That was so lovely. I feel like such an important person. My family is joining me online, so hello, guys. Stop it, you're gonna make me cry. Okay, I cannot express how grateful I am for this opportunity. Thank you to the department for believing in me, and the Humanities Department the Humanities Faculty for believing in me. Yeah, okay, now let me get to the actual thing. Okay, so actually, Professor Ndlovu kind of sabotaged us because he left out a lot of stuff. And when I was preparing, I prepared using his lecture, and guess what he did? He left out so much, but it doesn't matter. So as I was preparing and listening to Professor Ndlovu, several things kept popping up in my head. And I'm going to speak about what stood out the most for me. I made quite a few, so please bear with me. So the most important thing that stood out for me was how Professor Ndlovu is making us think of the aftermath of the uprisings. Because I think oftentimes the June 16, 1976 catastrophe is treated as just a township rebellion, and it's isolated from the bigger picture. This discussion made me realize that it was the blood of students, not students, but young school children that reconfigured international laws, international debates, as well as global diplomacy.
I think when we talk about Soweto, we kind of trap it
in June 16, 1976. And we think of the student marches, we think of the police brutality, and we think of the loss of lives on that day. Although this is important because it's what happened on that day, we kind of isolate the incident. So in public debate, especially, we hardly ever talk about what happened after that day, June 16, 1976. And what I like about Professor Ndlovu is that he centered his whole discussion around what happened after June 16. Okay. So Professor Ndlovu did mention that there were international bodies such as the UN and WPC, as well as Western countries such as Sweden and Norway that said, like, enough, like, this is too much. We should stop being passive and we should do something. The thing they did was to impose economic sanctions on South Africa. While we're still on the aftermath of the Soweto Uprising, we see that there were conflicts within organizations. There was also conflicts within students who both experienced the same incident, students who were both exiles. We see Tsietsi Mashinini on the one side saying all credit behind the uprisings should go to the Black Consciousness Movement and the South African student movement. And we have Skosemji, who says, let's not forget that the ANC was also responsible. But the ANC was obviously working undercover because it had been banned 16 years prior to 1976. Moving on from the aftermath, we had people questioning who or what was responsible for the uprisings. We have Steve Biko, who was saying it's the students. We should give credit to students. And we also have other people saying we should give credit to organizations such as the Black Consciousness Movement and the South African student movements. And then we have organizations such as the ANC realizing that at this moment in time, they had no real power. Power was within the students. The ANC at this point in time was dead. Every political leader was in prison or in exile, and the people who actually had power were the students. And then one thing I loved about this lecture was how Professor Ndlovu centered the idea of female agency. Not just female agency, but young women. The one thing I find ridiculous in history is how women are on the sidelines. Such an unfortunate thing. Women are on the sidelines. When women are mentioned, they're mentioned in passing, or they're mentioned in this grand event, such as the 1956 March. But what Professor does is that he introduces us to Skosemji, who is a former student at Isaac Morrison, who goes to the United Nations and gives her account of the uprisings and is absolutely moved by the respect that she gets. So while we think June 16, 1976 is dominated by male voices, let's not forget that women were also involved. Women were not just on the sidelines crying and bawling their eyes out like people like to say we always are doing, but women were actually, they had an impact too. And we have people like a young lady like Skosimju goes to the UN and gives an account. Okay. The other point I was going to mention, Professor didn't even touch it. So I'm gonna talk about something that's related to this. And this was going to be my closing point. Another thing that I enjoyed about this lecture was how Professor talked about belonging and solidarity. By belonging, I mean, is there anything that we can do without belonging some way or to an organization? This goes back to when Sikosim G was doing her tours in the United States, and she got confronted by her former classmates, and she was concerned with, firstly, their safety, and I'd also like to think she was concerned with them being taken seriously. And okay. And then we also have the issue of solidarity, right? Solidarity was not just a given thing here in South Africa. We had they had to fight for solidarity. When Sikosim G, for example, went to the United States and did her tours, she wasn't just welcomed, people were resisting. In one of her tours, she went in and there was no one. And as she got in, she was ushered out by two students who asked her, what issue, like what relationship do you have with these white people that are taking you from this venue to the next, while we here in the US have our own issues? Why are they paying attention to issues that are happening in South Africa and ignoring ours here in the United States? So yeah, there's the issue of solidarity and how it wasn't like a smooth journey. And then on a closing note, this is my official closing note, and this goes to Professor Ndlovu and to everyone who's seated and even my family online. This catastrophic event happened 50 years ago. Like, that's a long time ago. And I was thinking, as I was doing this, how is this related in today's conversations and in today's life? How is it related? And we're dealing with so much already. We're dealing with so much uncertainty. For example, and God forbid, a female student could leave this venue and in the next 5 minutes get sexually assaulted and killed. A student sitting here next year could graduate and not get a job ever. We're dealing with those kind of issues. So why should we be concerned about something that happened 50 years ago when we have so much going on? Why should I, as a 22-year-old, be concerned with something that happened 50 years ago? Why should a friend of mine here be concerned about something that happened 50 years ago when they were not even born at that time? And why should a friend of mine that's from Zimbabwe or Nigeria that's here in this venue be concerned about something that happened 50 years ago, as I keep mentioning, and not concern themselves with the issue of migration and abahambi? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alake. I'm not going to make even a single point. We should have left this venue 10, 15 minutes ago. So it's going to be just one round, because I can imagine other individuals would like to make comments, especially to these wonderful sort of speakers and the contents we've received this evening. So there are roving marks. If you have got anything to say, we'll take that one round and you can just coalesce all those as they are coming and respond all in once in one round. So if you lift your hand, I can see you from, there's one hand here, the second row, please take the mic to. And there is another hand, this column. Please get on with the question or comment or whatever.
Thank you so much. Prof Ndlovu, I have a question for you. And I quoted you saying, watching you guys here, I am so happy because we have a black majority. The best thing you've ever done at 14 years old is this, the representation. And so my question is about how you felt in 2016 watching the Fees Must Fall marches, because if this is making you happy, I can only imagine how much the 2016 Fees Must Fall protests must have triggered you, or what was going through your mind at the time, especially if that is not what you fought for at 14 years old.
Thank you. We'll hold the response to that. Let's take the second question.
Hello. Hi, Prof. Thank you so much for just this discussion. I just wanted to ask on something that you touched on in terms of preserving memory and just how this works in academia and how it works in terms of research. I think I'm trying to just understand the idea of how it can look credible in how publication can look credible in institutional eyes if there are so many selections of memories. As our respondents were saying, some people were saying that, oh, it's actually the Black consciousness movement who started this. It's actually the ANC who started this. So when it comes to academia, when it comes to work, and when it comes to going through the archives, how do researchers and students navigate this?
Okay, I don't see another hand I may have overlooked. But there are the two questions, one relating to how you would react and feel about Fees Must Fall.
Okay, then. But thank you. I think for students also, it's time now for them. So I'll be quick. So, Fees Must Fall, 2016. I was thinking like a Soweto generation person. Fees Must Fall was so disunited. It was all about the young elites in Wits, in UCT, in Oxford. What about the stories about the kids at University of Limpopo, University of Zululand, University of Fort Hare, and also the other universities in the Eastern Cape? They were erased out of the narratives. They were not there. Even the persisting narrative that is there exclude historically Black universities, And for us as the Soweto generation, we'll never allow that to happen. That is why I fought. Actually, my book is about bringing back the higher primary schools and the junior secondary schools into the narratives, because the senior students at high schools were dominant and the narrative was about them, and hence Tsietsi Mashinini Khotso and all of them were the leaders. My book says, no, it's not that. So it simply means it's long overdue now that for the 2016 movement, we have students from Walter Sisulu University, students from the University of Zululand from Fort Hare, and students from the University of Limpopo, students from the Mafeking campus of the University of Potchefstroom, writing their own story and their own narratives. And we compare that with the UCT and the Wits gang. Okay, in terms of what happened. Okay, for you, in terms of preserving memory, I think I did say it, that there was always a contestation even amongst us, and I mentioned the issue itself in terms of memorial itself, the naming of the memorial itself. And I gave you 3 options. I said it was Hastings Ndlovu, the first students to be killed by the police, not Hector. And I said it was Tsietsi Mashinini because he was the student leader, correctly so. And also the debates he held in New York with Sifiso. They were mind-boggling, debates. And those debates were about that issue you were raising. Is it the ANC? Is it the Black Consciousness movement? And as you said, if you are a student, you are given that project, you wanted to come out with an answer. The problem is, history as a discipline is not about right and wrong. It's only in maths and physics where you only have one answer. Because you have to have one answer, which says the force of gravity is 9.32 meters per second square. If you say the force of gravity is 10, you'll build an aeroplane or a building that will fall. Because in your calculation, you have to say it's 9.32 meters per second square. So in science, it's a single answer. In subjects like history, it's not a single answer. It depends how your answer is convincing. So I said to you, therefore, you have to convince your lecturer. We have so many answers in terms of the interpretation. So when I answered that question in terms of the naming of the museum, remember I said, it's not a numbers game in terms of who was shot first or went to high school, who didn't go to our school. It was Hector because by then the symbol itself, the newspaper article, was all over the world. TV stations, world-best newspaper, whether it's the New York or London, China or whatever, it's all about it. So we said, because he symbolizes the struggle itself and he represents Hastings Ndlovu, he represents Tsietsi Mashinini, he even represents Sifiso MG and myself. So in a sense, forget about the liberation movement. You heard what I said about them, that they were actually dead, all of them. And it needed the PCM movement. And also, you were correct, I'm not sure it's you or you, when you said Steve Big, even Steve Big or himself, that whatever I cite, the evidence I provide in the paper, I think it's in the book, I Write What I Like. He was saying it's the students. But even though he said he never thought they were better prepared for anything, he never said it's me. He never said it's the Black Consciousness movement. But he thought the students were not well organized. But they did it. So in a sense, don't settle for a single answer like in the sciences. Just put forward a convincing argument. You know, even if you think it's the Black Consciousness movement, just convince us that they were in class attending a Form 2 lesson in Afrikaans, and therefore they led the struggle. That's all I can say.
Thank you. We're going to stop with questions and remarks on that point of the complexities of preservation of memory, and call Claire to come and do the votes of thanks. And thank you. We're going to use whichever
I'll
one
use
you
this one, thank you.
That's right.
I have the unenviable task of trying to thank everybody who put this event together in the context where everyone is cold, hungry, and just wants to get out of here, but I'll do it nonetheless. So they say it takes a village to raise a child. It also takes a small village to put an event like this together. I do have lists of names here, which in the interests of time, I'm not going to go through. But I do just want to mention all of the kind of entities within our organization that have been part of bringing this wonderful event together this evening. So first, we'd like to thank all of our students from the Departments of History and International and Political Studies who have assisted in coordinating this event. Also from the Departments of History and Political Studies, our HODs and academics, as well as Professor Ndlovu for very beautifully holding this space for us this evening. Also our Dean of Humanities, Sifiso Magadla. Between these various departments and the faculty, well, these are the main instigators behind this event this evening. So thank you for putting your heads together and making this possible for us this evening. As we know, nothing happens without admin, so we'd also like to thank our faculty officers and administrative support in the History Department, in International and Political Studies, Political and International Studies. I always get it wrong, I'm so sorry. As well as Equity and Institutional Culture. We'd like to thank our Division of Marketing and Communications who have very generously committed their resources and time to this event this evening, as well as our IT division, and of course, our conferences and events who are responsible for the refreshments waiting for us outside. Finally, we'd like to thank our respondents, Alake Kondolati, Nolwazi, Lembe, for their rich and thought-provoking contributions. I wish we could sit and talk all night. Unfortunately, that is not possible. And of course, Professor Ndlovu for coming all the way to Makanda to join us here to share his work and wisdom with us. It has been an absolute privilege to sit and listen to you and learn from you. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out on this cold Makanda evening and joining us here in, like I said, what could be many more hours of conversation. But thank you for joining us here this evening. Before we step out, however, just to let you know that we have refreshments available. We know it's cold, we know it's past dinner time and everyone is hungry, but please be respectful and considerate of our fellow students, colleagues and guests as we enjoy the refreshments this evening. Other than that, I hope I've not missed anyone. Thank you all for being here and have a lovely evening further.